Consider shifting the focus in training from what employees need to learn to what employees need to do, and you may also see a shift in your results.
Action-first learning really is a philosophy. So what motivated me to write the book in one area was a lot of people get caught up in like, oh, is that a game or gamification? Oh, that's really not game. And so I would say to a lot of people, like, I don't really care. What I care about is whether or not learners are engaged and learning in meaningful activities.
That's our guest, renowned educator, author, and speaker, Karl Kapp. Karl joins DaVinci president Mason Scuderi and me to talk about his new book, Action First Learning, and discuss what you can do to put learners in the driver's seat to get stronger performance and better outcomes. Next on Powered by Learning.
Powered by Learning is brought to you by DaVinci Interactive. DaVinci's approach to learning is grounded in 30 years of innovation and expertise. We use proven strategies and leading technology to develop solutions that empower learners to improve quality and boost performance. Learn more at davinci.com.
Joining me today are DaVinci president Mason Scuderi and our guest, renowned professor, speaker, and author Karl Kapp. Karl's new book, Action First Learning, Instructional Design Techniques to Engage and Inspire, is out, and we are delighted to talk about his book and get his thoughts on the evolution of gamification. Hi, Karl. Great to see you.
Hi, yeah, it's great to be here.
Welcome, Karl.
Thanks. Great to be here, Mason. Thank you for having me.
Karl, no doubt most of our listeners are familiar with your work, but for those who aren't, just give a little summary about your journey in learning and development and what you're working on now.
Yeah, so great question. So I teach full-time at Commonwealth University, which used to be called Bloomsburg University, but we've merged with a couple of our sister schools. And at Commonwealth, I teach instructional design and technology classes. And a number of years ago, I really got interested in how do I make instruction more engaging? And so the whole research and idea of gamification came about way back in, I think, 2011 or 2012 or something. I published my first book on gamification called The Gamification of Learning and Instruction. And ever since then, I've been exploring the topic, looking at the topic, and thinking about how do we expand the topic so that more people can create instruction that's exciting, interesting, and engaging.
And of course, this is not your first book that just came out that we're going to be talking about today. You've written how many now?
I have. So I've written 10 books. And I say that this book is not just a culmination of my thoughts on it, but it also books. Like I'll write a book and someone will say, yeah, great book, but you have no case studies. So then I add case studies in my next book and they say, that's a great book, but there's no step-by-step instruction. So then I added step-by-step instruction. So this book has case studies, step-by-step, the whole 9 yards. I threw it in there, everything I learned from my previous 10. So it's kind of a combination of content as well as design.
Great.
Yeah, we really love the AI prompts that you integrated as well, Karl, into the book. They were really helpful.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And I thought it just gives people that kind of getting them over the hump of getting started with AI. So that was kind of cool that it was coming out. And plus, 2025, you can't write a book without mentioning the letters AI.
It's a great way to get started. Well, speaking of getting started, why don't you kick us off by telling us what is Action First Learning and what motivated you to write the book?
Yeah, so Action First Learning really is a philosophy. So what motivated me to write the book in one area was a lot of people get caught up in like, oh, is that a game or gamification? Oh, that's really not gamification. And so I would say to a lot of people, like, I don't really care. What I care about is whether or not learners are engaged and learning in meaningful activities. And so I really started thinking about that. And I'm like, we need maybe we need another term. And I thought of activity-based learning, but that has a lot of academic baggage, for lack of a better word, right? People say, well, that's not activity-based learning. You have to do this, or that's not. And so I'm like, okay. Let's get a term for practitioners that's about a philosophical, an overall approach. It doesn't have to be didactically defined. We can make it broad, and then a lot of things can come under that. So that was the impetus. And then the other impetus was I was looking at through old, I'm a comic book fan, looking through old comics, and Action Comics came up with Superman holding up the car. And I'm like, and what a lot of people, it was fun. What a lot of people don't realize is that book was actually an anthology. So it was not just about Superman. There were a number of different stories in there. And since the book was about 9 different approaches to action first learning, I thought, well, this would be a perfect kind of concept to go with. So we kind of went with that concept, making and giving people the tools to make action first learning in their own organizations, or helping other organizations figure out what's a good way to do that.
One of your early hooks in the book, Karl, is that traditional education and corporate training has moved away from action first approaches. Why do you think this happened?
I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of reasons. So, unfortunately, when training went online to web-based training, we missed a huge opportunity. We took the old broadcast model of me speaking to a large group of people, and we just digitized it. So the same message to everybody, and everybody gets the same instruction whether they need it or not. And we perpetuated that for a number of years, worrying about, oh, does this look good? How does it make me feel? But not learning outcomes. Those had seemed to be a secondary learning outcome. So I think part of the reason we got away from it was because it became easier to make broadcast instruction, became a little bit harder to think about instructional strategies, and a lot of people just kind of went in that direction. But now we're in 2025, and we know from the research, and we've known for a while, that when somebody is engaged with content, doing something, thinking about it, it becomes more real and more impactful. I mean, think all the way back to Montessori. Think back to Dewey. These people in the 1800s. Well, Montessori was a little later, but Dewey in the 1800s knew about learning by doing, and it just wasn't scalable. And so, with the technology now, I think it is scalable. And I think also, you think about the pandemic and the isolation that people felt. One of the things that action first learning can do is help overcome some of that isolation by tapping into the social elements of learning. So we go to Bandura's social learning theory. We know we learn from observing and working with others, and action first learning fits right into that social learning theory.
Yeah, you can really see those trends developing, and I think the book is a really good reminder to shake us up, to reevaluate. What are some examples that you've seen in the corporate world where action first learning has improved outcomes?
So just going back real quick is the idea of action first learning is as I mentioned, Dewey, and so it's not brand new, but we tend to, in the L&D field, go through these cycles of remembering something and then forgetting it and remembering it. And so I'm hoping that we'll remember now that this is really effective. There's lots of different ideas that have been impacted in corporate settings. So one example I like to give is I was asked to come in. This company was doing audits, and they were doing internal audits. They worked for the Department of Defense, and so every once in a while they had to do internal audits and investigations. And the course was beautifully created by a subject matter expert, a lawyer, and it had the learning objectives, and it had the terminology, it had the website, and then later on it had a role play. But the problem was nobody knew how to do an audit. Like, they came in and they're like, I don't. Well, didn't you go to class? Well, yeah, I learned about doing an audit, but I really, don't. So we flipped that. We said, okay, as soon as they walk into the classroom, we're going to give them a problem and they're going to have to solve it. So we said, hey, there's an anomaly. $10,000 seems to be missing. What are you going to do? And so everybody sat there and was like, I don't know. What am I going to do? And they just looked at the instructor for a while. Then someone said, well, what's the corporate policy? And then they started looking at the corporate policy and said, oh, what are the steps for doing an audit? Oh, what is? So by the end of that, it was like a 2-day. They actually had performed an audit. And so afterwards, we asked them, do you feel more comfortable? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. We now know how to do an audit. We could do an audit in an actual situation. So that's one example, just kind of flipping it in a classroom environment. Another thing that we did was working with, ironically, a large software company that said, hey, our division leaders are really good at their division, but every time we promote them, they kind of favor their division. They don't think at the enterprise-wide level. So they're sub-optimizing the organization. So we created a board game, and where people had these dilemmas that it was really interesting. There were 9 people around the board and 3 teams of 3. And if the teams worked together, the company would be successful. If they fought each other, the company wouldn't be successful. And so that was a great example of action first learning. And the conversations and the dynamics were just kind of amazing, and how that happened. And another one, we were helping this company. They were doing customer intake, like they were talking to new customers and onboarding. And we created branching scenarios for them. Basically, kind of I call it pick your own path, because choose your own adventure apparently is copyrighted and they will go after you. So pick your own path, or trademark.
We'll edit that out. Yeah.
So anyway, so pick your own path. But basically, it was kind of an intricate issue where people had to right away go in and make decisions, and the decisions had consequences, and the decisions had outcomes. And afterwards, it was so funny because like the training had told them to use a certain approach, and like no one was using this approach. And then afterwards, people were like, "Oh my gosh, the approach of doing such and such is so awesome. I'm going to use it all the time." And the trainers were like, "Yeah, we've been like saying that in every class. Like, how come you didn't pick it up?" But it's one thing to hear it; it's another thing to experience it. And so they were able to experience it, see what the consequences were, and apply that. And it actually helped improve onboarding and retention of customers dramatically. So those are just 3 examples.
Awesome.
It definitely sounds like action first learning puts the learner first and makes the learning more relevant, more engaging, and probably sticky in the long run. So I'm sure those are the kinds of benefits you're seeing.
Exactly. The idea of action first learning is don't ask the question, what do learners need to know? Ask the question, what do they need to do? And sometimes those are not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Karl, one of the terms that's still ringing in my ears after reading the book is desirable difficulties. And you mentioned how instructional designers should weave these into the training. Why do you think that they're important?
Yeah, so that's a concept by Bork, and I think it's an amazingly. It really resonated with me too the first time I heard that term, because the idea is that, and it's so counterintuitive, that the easier we learn something, the easier we absorb it. Actually, we're like, oh, great, this is great learning. But actually, the harder it is to retain it. So what we need to do really is, if we struggle a little bit, and I ask all people, like, think about how you really struggled with learning, and then all of a sudden you got it. You remember that forever. But you cram for a test, you get an A on it the next day, maybe you remember it, but 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, 5 weeks, you don't remember anything. So the idea behind the concept of desirable difficulties, and it's desirable, so it's not just throwing difficulties to be difficulty, but slowing down the learning process so that people really understand what they're doing, processing it, struggling with it, overcoming the cognitive biases they may have, or the obstacles that they have to learning it, will allow that learning to stick more effectively. Now, learners don't like it. Like, if you look at some research about activity-based learning, there's been some research that said, "Hey, students, how'd you like activity-based learning?" They're like, "Yeah, I didn't learn as much. It's not as good as a lecture." But it turns out, but then they quizzed them or tested them, and they found out, yeah, you actually learned more than the lecture. You're not a very good arbiter of your own knowledge. And we're not. Humans are not. We're not good at kind of self-assessment at all. But the idea is that the struggling actually leads to more learning, deeper learning, and then more ability to apply that learning. So all kinds of goodness comes out of that. And desirable difficulty are things like giving a learner unorganized information, having them organize it. Spaced practice, spaced retrieval is an example of that. Giving learners quizzes actually is a way of recalling information. So there's a lot of really simple tools to create a desirable difficulty, but it's something that we often don't think about because we get this pushback from the learners. And I liken it to a physician, right? I do not like to get shots. Like I get lightheaded and whatever. I'm like, don't give me a shot. Don't put a needle in my arm. But you know what? It's good for me. And so I have to get that vaccination. So the idea of, sometimes we as learning professionals have to administer something to a learner that maybe they don't like, but is good for them from a learning perspective. And I think that's one thing in the industry we need to do a little bit more, is say, look, we're professionals. We know what we're doing. Take this medicine and you'll feel better. So, do this instruction and you'll be better on the job. So that's kind of the idea as well.
I would suppose that the challenges kind of lead to confidence, which lead to competence, And I wonder what advice you might give to instructional designers who are thinking about how to build in those desirable difficulties without making them too difficult. Are there? It's probably a fine line.
It's a very fine line. And one of the things, so, going back to my gamification history, one of the things that game developers have done really well is accommodated that. So if you go into a game, for example, you might get like 3 levels of help. So let's say I'm going in, I'm trying to find a treasure, right? The first level of help might be, and I'm in the woods. It might be behind the green and gray, you'll find the treasure that you're seeking, right? And like, well, what does that mean, right? Then the second level might be something like, look to the left of the screen behind nature, right? And rocks and trees. The third level might be, it's behind the rock, near the tree, go find, right? And so now that's 3 different levels of help that I can decide as a learner what I want. And if I get super frustrated, I go to the third level and I find the stupid treasure and I move on. And that's really helpful from a learning perspective. Next time I go somewhere, I'm like, hey, I want to be a little bit more challenged. So we can actually build these levels into the instruction to do that. And we've done that with equipment, right? We have a demonstrate version, a practice version, and a test version. We say, here's a piece of equipment that you've been working with. And most people will go to the test version and then find out, ooh, I don't know how to do this. And then sometimes they'll go all the way back to the demo. Oh, this is how you do it. And that taps into, Malcolm Knowles, the father of andragogy, said, adult learners learn best when they know they don't know something. So if you give them this situation where they don't know something, this difficulty, then they're more apt to learn and figure that out. So instructional designers can develop multiple levels of help. They can even ask, like, what level do you want to go in at? Do you want to go in as an expert, novice, something like that? That's the way you can do it. You can give them hints. You can have tips and kind of go through that process, and that helps them. I think the instructional design process, somewhere along the line, it became like, no, we just dummy it down, and so we'll give them the most basic information, and then we wonder why our learners are bored. Like, we're dealing with adult learners. They know a lot of stuff. And if we boil it down to the very basics and start there, we lose them from the beginning.
They see the need.
Right, exactly.
They see the need. Like, here's why I should pay attention because I don't know this yet. Mm-hmm. So that does make it more relevant.
Yeah, exactly.
Carl, you also mentioned that reflection is a key part of the action first cycle, which makes sense when you have overcome a significant challenge, that you might need to reflect on it, because it's more than just clicking next, and finishing the module and checking the box.
Exactly.
But how can we build reflection into the, to the end of the online learning experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always say there's no learning without reflection. There's only experience. And so if we really want to learn, we have to think about, like, what just happened, whether it's positive or negative. And so we as instructors can do a number of things, or even in e-learning designers can do a number of things. One is build that in. Learners typically will not take the time to reflect on their own unless we encourage them to do that. So at the end of the module, what did you learn? What are you going to take away? How are you going to apply this? Reflect on any thoughts that you have. So you can do that physically, or you can do that in a module. We did a module one time. It was so much fun. It was Zombie Sales Apocalypse was the name of it. It was a digital game. And the idea was you were trying to sell to pharma, and you, if you didn't say the right thing, you were selling them an antidote to zombie virus. And at the end of that, there was a reporter that came up to you and said, hey, that was a pretty tough situation you had in there with all those zombies and trying to sell them the antidote. Can you reflect on a couple of questions? And then the reporter just asked questions about learning. What sales strategy worked? What things did you think you were doing wrong? What would you do next time? And all those were just in the form of this interview. And it was very effective because the learners were forced to reflect without saying, okay, everybody, now we're going to reflect. And the other thing I want to point out is that a lot of learners, it's kind of like, it's so interesting. We never learn how to learn, right? In high school, we just kind of figure it out, right? They maybe teach us study habits, maybe not, which should be in every class, I think. But adult learners, especially, we have no learning and reflection. Like, nobody's ever taught us how to reflect. So one of the things that we can do is give learners the tools to reflect, whether it's, a video reflection, whether it's certain questions, whether it's a sequence, whether it's even learning that there are different ways to reflect, right? You can reflect kind of just the facts. You can reflect on interpretation of the facts. You can reflect on how somebody else reacted to the facts. So there's lots of different ways to reflect. And those are some of the ways that we can help learners overcome that. And the value is not just in that situation, but across, like, also, if we see somebody to reflect, then they can reflect on all kinds of learning situations and take that with them wherever they go.
Absolutely. Karl, it was a really interesting parallel that you drew in the book about how toddlers learn and how adults should learn. So as learning professionals, what can we take away from that?
I think it's so much fun. I mentioned sometime that, how nobody teaches a baby a language. And somebody said, well, but we talk to babies differently. But not all the time. We do and we don't. So I thought that was kind of an interesting observation. My favorite thing is to watch a baby imitate the rhythm and cadence of a conversation before they can even speak. I just think that's so fascinating that they're like, and they stop and they wait but it's just as if they were having a conversation. So what I think we can learn is a number of things. Like, toddlers are very exploratory. I think exploratory learning is a great way to help somebody really learn something that they want to learn or that's valuable to them. So even I think, so what we can do in instructional design is create non-sequential instruction. Like, a lot of times we have to say, do this screen first, this screen first, this screen first. But let's create non-sequential to get the learners' interest going. The other thing that toddlers do is that they test boundaries, right? Like, can I do this? Can I do that? And so I think one of the interesting things that we can do is allow learners to test boundaries. Like, okay, what if I act unethically? What happens? What if a lot of companies, no, our compliance training, we can't have anybody, doing anything wrong, whatever. But, people are wondering, like, so what is the consequence? Like, what will happen? So kind of demonstrating that, I think, can happen as well. And the other thing about toddlers is that they're fun to watch. Like, a toddler, when they're in a good mood, like, don't get me wrong, they can be in bad moods, but they're just enjoying everything that they do and everything that they encounter. And they're just excited by the newness of it. And while we might not be able to create that exactly, I think creating an environment where things are new, things are exciting, and things are dare I say, fun,
fresh, yeah.
Yep, is a great way for learning. We've school kind of beats out curiosity and engagement and interactivity and all that kind of stuff. Like, we all remember in school we got in trouble for talking to our classmates, but sometimes we were just talking off topic. But sometimes we were curious about the question or how it relates to me or whatever. But you're not allowed to do that. You have to be quiet. And so I think if we go back to before that, it can be very engaging and make learning really relevant.
I think you also mentioned, Karl, and I think we've probably experienced it in our line of work in the industry, that some corporate leaders might resist active learning and might exist things that are a little more experimental. So how, as L&D professionals, can we help to overcome this cultural pushback?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing I like to say is it's easier to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. So sometimes just do it. Sometimes it's the terminology. Like, again, when I got away from games and gamification, a lot of people got stuck up on the terminology. Hey, game is a 4-letter word in this company. We're not using it. So action first makes sense from a perspective of doing something. I think showing the results, so you actually do that. And the other analogy I often use, which I think is so amazing to me, because let's say that you're a salesperson, you've been with the company for 20 years, and we say, hey, we're going to do some sales training. They go, I've been here for 20 years. I'm not doing any training on sales. You go to Tom Brady and say, hey, you want to practice football? Oh, yeah. Let's go throw the ball. In fact, I'll be here at 6:00 tomorrow morning. Let's see you. It's amazing. Why is Tom Brady the best quarterback, arguably, in the world, right? Practicing. Because he knows that's how you get better, you stay sharper, and you improve yourself. It's in sports all over the place. in corporations, it's not. And I find that kind of ironic. So I often talk to organizational leaders, operational leaders, et cetera, and I say, look, your people need to practice these skills. Otherwise, they're practicing them on customers. They're practicing them on other business units. They're practicing them on their fellow employees. And maybe they're doing it right, and maybe they're not. And you want to take that chance? Let's just do a little bit of practice. And it's amazing the impact just a little bit of training does when it's done right, and they understand why they're doing it on that particular element. So I often use the practice argument as well.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Another challenge that may come up, and at DaVinci, we know that creating quality, deeper learning experiences can have some cost implications. But what are some ways that learning leaders can implement action-first learning in a more budget-friendly way if they don't have the resources for high-fidelity simulations?
In the book, I start with the chapter on card games. So the other day I was at a conference, and had like 100 people there in this activity, and I took out card games and we were playing a card game. And somebody said to me afterwards, they sent me an email, said, "Hey Karl, this card game was great. Where'd you go get the cards? I tried printing stuff out at Staples all the time and it doesn't work." So I emailed him back and said, "I have bad news for you. I printed the cards at Staples." So you can buy an Avery 2x2 cards for like $24, 180 cards. And so you can do it very cheaply with cards. Board games, there's like places called Print and Play. There's the Game Crafter, cheaper than ever, that you can create games. And so you can do that easily. So the idea that action first learning has to be fully immersive simulation is not true. And in fact, some of the research says that if you do the same cognitive activity, but even though it's not exactly the same physical activity, you can get learning benefits. So for example, card games, let's say you work for an insurance company and you have to sort valid claims from invalid claims. Now, some would argue that if you work for an insurance company, they're all invalid claims, but let's for a minute pretend some are valid and some are invalid. And when you sort them, you're going through that mental process of what are the criteria, how does it work, and what is the element there. And so those types of activities are not really costly. You could do a quick, not just physical card game, but you could do a digital card game and very easily get those kind of results. And so I think with some imagination, so we did, one of the chapters in the book is about escape rooms. And we did an escape room where we just basically had maybe $150 worth of supplies. And, we had a spreadsheet that you had to fill out the number, and you had to take the number over here. And then we had something that was in Microsoft Word. And then we had something that was like, so if you get creative, you can do action first learning at a very tight budget. And it's more about the design process than the technology. Now, AI, as we mentioned before, greatly accelerates a lot of that as well. You can use an AI prompt and it can, accelerate the process dramatically. So there's that element as well. And there's never been, I don't think, a more exciting time to be involved with L&D and action first learning, because we have so many tools at our disposal.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think my next question is that segues really nicely into it, which is with more training options than ever, and more modalities and ideas, and now action first learning. What are your thoughts on balancing speed and depth in training, and especially in like a high pressure industry where time is of the essence?
Yeah. So there is a saying that I read in a novel one time, and it said, "Flow is smooth and smooth is fast." And I just thought that was the greatest. Flow is smooth and smooth is fast. What happens, I think, in a lot of organizations is they think that by going 110 miles an hour, everything will work out. And so we need to go fast. But what they miss is that element of smoothness. So if you're going very, very fast, oftentimes you got to go back and do things over again. You have to rework things. You have to apologize to clients, all kinds of stuff like that. But if we have deeper knowledge, and it does take some time to develop, and you also have to keep those people, you can't, keep chucking them out. You keep people with deep knowledge, then they do things smoothly. And when they do things smoothly, that speeds up your process. So instead of looking for speed, look for smoothness. Do people do things effectively? Do people understand what they're doing? Do people, are they able to overcome obstacles that they might encounter? If we train them to think and act in those ways, then we actually can move faster as an organization eventually. What's happened is we decided we'll act really fast first and then figure out everything later. And that often for an organization, unless you have, and that's why venture capital like burns through so much cash, because they rarely take the time to be smooth. They simply think it's going to be fast. And so when you talk to organizations and you want to build an organizational culture and you want to build organizations that last and that make an impact, you have to think smooth first, fast second, and slow is smooth, and then smooth is fast.
That's an excellent explanation. That's the first time I've heard that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's so funny. I like for leisure, I guess. I like to read like kind of spy novels, and they're all the same. They're all exactly the same. There's a guy who used to be in some secret government agency. He got kicked out for some shady thing that happened. And then his wife, girlfriend, kids, whatever, get killed. And he goes on a mission. He finds out the secret agency was trying to eliminate him. And so I read those books all the time. So they're all the same, but different authors and different characters. But one of those books talked about this slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that works for almost everything. And so I've adopted that.
I would think too, it helps to build on sequential learning too, that if you go in and there's that understanding of the first concept, then there's going to be greater understanding and competency with all the subsequent ones, which ultimately will make the learner more proficient in his or her job.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny to me how little organizations think about practicing and perfecting what their employees do every day. And the only way, and so think about an employee that doesn't really kind of know customer service, right? And so they get on the phone and they're practicing with the customer. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, let me try that. Oh, that didn't work. Meanwhile, your customer's like, this is the worst customer service ever. And I can tell you, probably those employees aren't reflecting on it. So they're not learning from how are they learning? How are they improving? And so that's why organizations, I think, really need to invest in this kind of approach so that they can become better in the long run. And it truly is an investment. And people nowadays want quick return on their money. It's just the same thing. I want quick return on my human resources, but actually assets grow over time. They don't grow immediately.
Well, Karl, we couldn't leave the conversation today without getting your take on gamification and where we are with gamification. So you're the leading expert. I don't think there's any dispute about that. But how do you think gamification is evolving with the adoption of AI and, like we said before, more modalities and options than ever available to us? So how does that bring us home into action first learning? Yeah,
that's a great question. So the working title for this book was Beyond Gamification. So what I really wanted to do was kind of move to the next level. And I think gamification has definitely moved from the original like points, badges, and leaderboards. Jesse Shell called it chocolate covered broccoli, I think, or exploitative wear and all that kind of stuff, to understanding that games are effective because they have challenges, because they have feedback loops, because they have cognitive dissonance that has to be aligned, right? So all of those things we now understand are really what makes games more effective. So gamification is becoming at a much more deeper level from a learning perspective, in that people are making the instruction more with more feedback, with more engagement, with more of those elements, and less of let's throw points at it or let's throw a badge at it. And so I called it content gamification. And I really think content gamification is becoming more and more of the future, where you get into kind of the flow of what's happening rather than these external points and leaderboards and badges. And I think, and I wouldn't have written the book Action First Learning if I didn't think action first learning is the next step. People now need to really think about, what does a learner need to do? Like, I think gamification in some ways is like, what do we have to give the learner to motivate them? Like, so what are we giving to them? But now it's what does the learner need to do, and how can we help them do it? And that's kind of the new paradigm. What is the learner doing, and how do we help them do that? Well, we can craft the instruction that way. It becomes valuable to the learner. Now, with AI, we can now create, automated digital coaches. And so a lot of the training can be done like in your pocket. Like I can pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm going into a meeting with somebody. Can you give me some information on the best way to negotiate, right? And I can get that information and easily get that. So I think one of the shifts that's happening is, as designers of instruction, we now have to think about designers of coaches, designing of mentors, designing of experiences. And so we're going to be doing more and more of that. Now, that doesn't negate the need for deep learning in courses and things like that. And I'm afraid the industry is going to go all, we're a pendulum. So we'll go all one way. Oh, everything's an AI coach. And then we're going to find out, hey, wait a minute, people don't have deep knowledge. Especially one of the things that I worry about is, I've had a number of years of experience. So when something comes up in the AI, I can, put the dots together and I can go, oh, well, that's not right based on my experience. This, and that can't possibly be right. Let me check that. But if you grow up with AI and you don't have those, years of experience, I kind of worry, like, where are you going to get that? And I just read an article the other day that said a lot of entry-level jobs, which are being eliminated by AI, are adversely impacting the new employees, because now they're not getting that experience, the experience of rolling up your sleeves and earning your stripes for the first 5-10 years. So that's going to be interesting. But I think as designers of instruction, thinking about AI, right now, we use it to help us speed up our process, help us make connections where maybe we couldn't if we have that experience, and help give learners, chatbots and coaches and things like that. And that'll continue to grow, and it'll only get better from here. But we have to kind of go in with both eyes wide open, understanding both the promise of AI and also the perils of AI. And I think if we do that, it's going to be an exciting time forward, but we have to be a little bit cautious in where we go. I don't think instructional design is going away as a career. I think that's here to stay, because people always need to learn, and it always needs to be designed. And some of even the best AI instruction I've seen still kind of lacking. And I believe we learn through connections. Like, I always find it very interesting that people want to use an AI avatar to teach leadership. Well, if you're leading AI avatars, go for it. If you're leading people, it's not quite
not so
the
much.
same.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Karl, we can't thank you enough for joining us today. You've shared so many great insights from your book, and we're going to put a link in the show notes to your book and some of your other recent resources so people can learn a little bit more about your thoughts on action-based learning and also gamification and some of the other things that you've been writing about lately. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. So thank you.
And Karl, we really appreciated you joining the DaVinci Summer Offsite staff meeting earlier in July and sharing your insights with the entire DaVinci team. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that opportunity.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Karl. Take care. We'll look forward to having you back on again.
Thanks. Look forward to it.
Thanks to DaVinci President Mason Scuderi and our guest, Karl Kapp, for joining us today. You'll find links to some of Karl's latest articles and resources, as well as his new book, Action First Learning, in the show notes. If you have ideas for future topics or guests, please reach out to us at poweredbylearning@davinci.com. And don't forget to subscribe to Powered by Learning wherever you listen to your podcasts.